What lie got so big that the truth wasn't even an option anymore? I was at a family dinner when my parents asked about my new girlfriend. She's kind. Just tell us she's not like that last black one, my mom interrupted. Dad laughed, adding, we barely survived that embarrassment. Amara was brilliant, beautiful, kind, and black. Just like my ex, they'd spent 2 years tearing apart after our breakup. Her name's Audrey, I heard myself say. From Connecticut. Their faces transformed. Mom actually clapped. Finally, when do we meet her? She travels for work, I mumbled, already regretting it. Banking. Perfect, Dad beamed. A good family, I'm sure. The lie metastasized through my family like cancer. Dad upgraded our country club membership to family tier because Audrey will expect certain standards. They threw out the African art in the guest room, replacing it with nautical prints because Audrey will feel more at home. At Thanksgiving, surrounded by family, the comments started flowing. Thank goodness Preston came to his senses, Aunt Linda said. That phase was so embarrassing. Over the next few months, my parents revealed their true colors. Each dinner became a masterclass in casual racism. Mom, if this fell apart, the humiliation would kill your grandmother. Literally. Dad, told every client about Audrey. Donaldson almost pulled his account during your experiment. They'd transformed their entire world around a woman who didn't exist. 6 months passed, and when they realized they still hadn't met Audrey, the questions got sharper. Hey, Preston, did you say it was banking she worked in? Yeah, why? That's funny because last time I asked you said it was finance. Each time I managed to divert the conversation to how much I hated black people. It broke my heart, but I thought I was protecting Amara. Dad asked his golf buddies in Connecticut. Nobody knew any Audreys in banking. And soon they were drilling me with specifics. Which Hartford suburb again? What's her middle name? The more advanced their lies became, the more my blood boiled. I was dating a black woman, not doing drugs. Ran into Audrey's parents at the mall, Mom would lie, studying my reaction. When I managed to keep a poker face, their tests grew bolder. Dad insisted on sending Audrey money for Christmas through Venmo, and I muttered something about her not being able to figure out online banking. That's pretty strange considering she's a banker. They got more and more obsessed with proving I was lying. Dad called Yale's alumni office about Audrey's graduation year. Mom joined Connecticut Facebook groups hunting for Audrey's family. Funny, Audrey went to Yale but doesn't know Professor Stevens. I tried to look as confused as possible. That's weird. I'll have to ask her about that. Desperation crept into their tactics. Grandma doesn't have long left to live. She keeps asking for Audrey. We need to meet her soon. They announced a surprise trip to Connecticut, then moved the entire family reunion there so Audrey's family can attend easily. The pressure was crushing. I knew they knew when Dad cornered me. Son, if something's wrong with Audrey, you can tell us. But I couldn't. Not with everything they'd built on this lie. The investigation reached its peak with full invasion of privacy. They recovered deleted texts through our family plan. Found the 404 area code calls to Atlanta, not Connecticut. Not even my racist comments could distract them from my search history that said, how to tell racist parents the truth. Sunday dinner. I walked in to find them waiting with a laptop, notebook, and Grandma's ring box. Where's Audrey? Mom asked, not looking up. At her parents in Hartford. Which part? Dad's voice was ice. We just got back from Hartford. My stomach dropped. Son, is she black? The question hung there like a loaded gun. Dad stood. We know Audrey doesn't exist. The PI we hired has been following you to Decatur. The reservation systems at restaurants show a party of 2, Preston and Amara. Your credit cards, your location history, that therapy appointment about family acceptance. Mom was crying now. Just tell us she's not black. Please. Tell us you haven't been lying to our faces for 8 months. Tell us the wedding we planned, the deposits we made, the people we told. Tell us it wasn't all for some Her name is Amara, I said quietly. The sound my mother made wasn't quite a scream. Dad gripped the mantle. 8 months, she whispered. Do you understand what you've done? Grandma changed her will. Your father's promotion was because of Audrey. The doorbell rang, and when I opened it, I knew our lives would never be the same again. Amara stood there in that blue dress I loved, the one she wore on our 3rd date, holding her shoulders back and her chin up while the porch light made her skin glow. My mom's mouth fell open as she looked from me to Amara and back again, her face going white, then red, then almost purple in about 3 seconds flat. Dad pushed past me to get a better look, his hands shaking as he gripped the doorframe. I took a deep breath and grabbed Amara's hand, pulling her forward slightly. This is Amara, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She's who I've been dating for over a year. The words hung there for maybe 2 seconds before Mom let out this awful sound, not quite a scream, but worse somehow, and collapsed backward into Dad's arms, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Dad caught her, but his eyes stayed locked on Amara, his face getting redder and redder like he might actually explode. Amara stepped past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. setting her purse on the little side table by the door like she'd done it 100 times before. She looked right at my parents and said she came because I shouldn't have to face this alone, and because she deserved to look them in the eye. Dad let go of Mom, who grabbed onto the wall for support and slammed his laptop shut so hard I thought it might break. He pointed at me with a finger that shook with rage. 8 months of lies, his voice cracked. Do you understand what you've done? I felt something snap inside me. Years of keeping quiet and playing along just breaking apart. What I've done? The words came out louder than I meant. You just spent 20 minutes begging me to say she wasn't black. Aunt Linda came running from the kitchen, probably drawn by all the yelling. And when she saw Amara, she actually put her hand over her heart and started fanning herself with the other one. Oh my God, Preston! She looked at me like I'd brought a wild animal into the house. What will people say? That's when Conrad appeared from Dad's study holding this thick manila folder, and I realized Dad had been planning this whole thing, had him waiting there the entire time. Conrad looked at Dad and held up the folder. 3 months of surveillance photos if you need them, sir. The way he said it, so casual like he was talking about the weather, made my skin crawl. Amara turned to look at Conrad, and I was surprised how calm she seemed, how controlled her voice was when she spoke. You've been stalking us? She pulled out her phone. That's actually illegal without consent. Conrad's face went a little pale, but he didn't back down, just stood there holding that folder like it was some kind of weapon. Mom had stopped crying enough to find her voice again, and she pointed at Amara with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. You've been laughing at us this whole time, haven't you? Her voice got higher with each word. Making fools of us! Amara shook her head slowly, keeping her eyes on Mom. No, ma'am. I've been loving your son while he was too scared to tell you I existed. Those words hit me hard. Because they were true. Completely true. And I could see in Amara's eyes all the hurt she'd been hiding for months while I made up stories about some fake white girl from Connecticut. Dad opened his laptop back up and started scrolling through what looked like credit card statements, his fingers moving fast across the trackpad. Every dinner, every gift, every hotel room, all with her while you told us about banking conferences. He turned the screen toward me, showing highlighted charges from restaurants in Decatur, jewelry stores, weekend trips we'd taken together. I tried to defend myself, saying the banking conferences were real because Amara actually did work at SunTrust Corporate. She just happened to be black while doing it, but even I knew how weak that sounded. That's when Mom's phone started ringing and she put it on speaker without even checking who it was, and Grandma's voice filled the room, thin and shaky but clear enough. What's happening over there? Mom looked at me with tears streaming down her face. Mother, Preston has something to tell you. I walked closer to the phone, my legs feeling like they weighed 1,000 pounds. Grandma, I love you, but I'm not going to apologize for who I love. There was this long, terrible silence before Grandma's voice came back, cold as ice. Then you're not the grandson I raised. The line went dead. Mom started ripping the nautical prints off the walls, the ones they'd bought to replace the African art, throwing them on the floor where the glass frames shattered. We changed everything. She was screaming now. Everything for a lie. Amara stepped forward carefully, avoiding the broken glass. You changed everything for your own fantasy about who your son should date. Dad stood up and got right in my face, so close I could smell the bourbon on his breath. You have 2 choices right now. End this, and we figure out damage control, or leave and never come back. I didn't even have to think about it. Then I'm leaving. Mom grabbed my arm, her nails digging in through my shirt. Your inheritance. Everything we built. I pulled my arm away gently but firmly. Everything you built came with conditions I can't meet. That's when Conrad's wife Eleanor came out of the study too, holding printed photos. Actual printed photos of me and Amara together. She spread them across the coffee table like evidence in a trial, each one showing moments I thought were private. Me kissing Amara goodbye at her apartment door, us walking through the park holding hands, sharing lunch at that little place in Decatur we loved. Amara looked at the photos, and her whole body went rigid. Then she turned to Mom, who was still crying into Dad's shoulder. No, ma'am. I've been loving your son while he was too scared to tell you I existed. The words hit me harder than any punch ever could. Because they were completely true, and I could see in Amara's eyes all the pain she'd been hiding for 8 months while I made up stories about some fake white girl. Mom pulled away from Dad and pointed at Amara with a shaking finger, but before she could speak, Dad was already opening his laptop again, his fingers moving fast across the keyboard. He turned the screen toward me, showing spreadsheet after spreadsheet of credit card charges, every restaurant in Decatur highlighted yellow, every jewelry store purchase circled in red, the hotel charges from our weekend trips marked with angry notes in the margins. Every dinner, every gift, every hotel, all with her while you told us about banking conferences. I tried to explain that the banking conferences were real, that Amara actually worked at SunTrust Corporate. She just happened to be black while doing it. But the words came out weak and pathetic. That's when Mom's phone started buzzing on the side table and she grabbed it, putting it on speaker without even checking who was calling. And Grandma's voice filled the room, thin and shaky, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "What's happening over there? I heard shouting." Mom looked at me with tears still streaming down her face, while Dad kept scrolling through bank statements on his laptop. "Mother, Preston has something to tell you about his girlfriend." I walked closer to the phone, my legs feeling heavy, and spoke directly into it. "Grandma, I love you, but I'm not going to apologize for who I love." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever before Grandma's voice came back, cold and sharp. "Then you're not the grandson I raised." The line went dead with a click that echoed through the room. Mom let out this sound that was half sob, half scream, and started grabbing the nautical prints off the walls, the ones they'd bought specially for Audrey, throwing them on the floor where the frames cracked and glass scattered everywhere. "We changed everything for nothing." She was pulling them down faster now, not caring about the glass breaking under her feet. Amara stepped forward carefully, avoiding the broken frames. "You changed everything for your own fantasy about who your son should date." Dad slammed his laptop shut so hard the whole table shook, then stood up and got right in my face, close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath. "You have two choices. End this now, and we figure out damage control, or leave, and never come back." I looked at him, then at Mom, who was still destroying the nautical prints, then at Amara, who was standing there with her head high despite everything. "Then I'm leaving." The words came out steady, even though my hands were shaking. Mom dropped the frame she was holding, and it shattered on the hardwood floor, adding to the mess of broken glass and torn prints. "Your inheritance! Everything we built for you!" She grabbed my arm, her nails digging in through my shirt sleeve. I pulled away gently, but she held on tighter. "Everything you built came with conditions I couldn't meet." Dad's face got even redder, and he grabbed my shoulder, spinning me back toward him. "You're throwing away your entire future for her?" Conrad stepped forward from where he'd been standing by the door, still holding that folder like it meant something. "We have 3 months of documentation if you need it for legal purposes." Eleanor nodded beside him, gathering up the photos from the coffee table and putting them back in a neat stack. Roy appeared from behind his parents holding what looked like printed text messages. "We recovered everything from his cloud backup, hundreds of messages about hiding the relationship." I felt sick looking at them going through my private messages like they had any right to do that. Dad let go of my shoulder and walked over to Roy, taking the printed messages and scanning through them quickly. "You've been planning this deception for months." He threw the papers at me and they scattered across the floor, mixing with the broken glass. Amara picked up her purse from where she'd set it on the side table. "Preston, I'm leaving. You can come with me or stay here, but I won't stand here. And be treated like I'm some kind of disease." She headed for the door, and I didn't even have to think about it. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door and followed her. Aunt Linda suddenly appeared from the kitchen, where she must have been hiding this whole time, blocking the doorway with her arms spread wide. "If you walk out that door with her, you're done. No family events, no holidays, nothing." I looked her straight in the eyes. "Then I guess this is goodbye." I stepped around her and she grabbed at my shirt, but I kept walking. Dad's voice boomed behind us. "I'll call every connection I have. You'll never work in this city again." I turned back one last time, looking at the destruction in the living room, the broken frames, the scattered papers, my parents standing there looking like their world had ended. "Then I'll work somewhere else." We made it to Amara's car and I completely broke down, everything hitting me at once, what I'd just lost, what I'd just chosen, the weight of 8 months of lies crushing down on me. Amara didn't start the car right away, just sat there with tears running down her face while I tried to get myself together. 8 months, Preston. 8 months of being your dirty little secret. I tried to tell her I was protecting her from them, but she cut me off. "No, you were protecting yourself from having to choose." The words hit harder than anything my parents had said because deep down I knew she was right. We drove to her apartment without saying another word, both of us just sitting with everything that had happened. When we pulled up to her building, I saw Savannah's car already parked outside, and my stomach dropped because I knew Amara had called her friend for backup. Savannah was waiting at Amara's door with a bottle of wine and a box of tissues, and she took one look at us and knew exactly what had gone down. Amara told her about the private investigator while I stood there feeling like an idiot, and Savannah's whole face changed when she heard they'd been following us for months. "That's criminal harassment," she said, pulling out her phone to look up the actual laws. I asked if I could stay, but Amara said she needed space to think, so I ended up on her couch with a blanket while she and Savannah talked in her bedroom. I could hear them through the thin walls, Amara crying and Savannah telling her she deserved better than someone who would hide her for almost a year. I didn't sleep at all, just lay there thinking about every lie I'd told, every time I'd chosen the easy way out instead of standing up to my family. My phone kept buzzing all night with calls and texts from relatives who'd already heard different versions of what happened. Some were calling me ungrateful, others were begging me to come to my senses, and a few were just asking if it was true about Amara being black. By morning, I had 73 missed calls and over 100 texts, most of them from numbers I recognized as extended family. I deleted them all without reading most of them because I couldn't handle their judgment on top of everything else. Around 7 in the morning, Amara came out of her room looking exhausted and told me I could shower. but then I needed to find somewhere else to stay for a few days. I called Galen, my therapist, from the parking lot of Amara's building and practically begged for an emergency appointment. He could hear something was wrong in my voice and squeezed me in that afternoon, even though it was his day off. I drove around for hours with nowhere to go, finally parking at a coffee shop where I sat in a corner booth trying to process everything. My dad texted me a photo of paperwork removing me from the family trust with a message that just said, "This is what you chose." Mom sent a long, rambling text about how I'd destroyed her reputation at the country club and ruined everything they'd worked for. I showed Galen all the messages when I got to his office, and he helped me understand that their reaction said everything about them and nothing about me. "You finally chose authenticity over approval," he said, which sounded nice but didn't make me feel any better about losing Amara's trust. We spent the whole session working through the guilt and shame I felt, not just about lying to my parents, but about making Amara live in the shadows for so long. Galen suggested bringing Amara to a joint session if she was willing, to work through the damage I'd done to our relationship. I texted her after therapy asking if she'd consider it, and she didn't respond for hours before finally sending back, "I'll think about it." I checked into a cheap motel near the highway, because all the decent hotels were booked, and I didn't want to use my credit cards that my dad could track. The room smelled like cigarettes and the AC barely worked, but at least it was somewhere to crash while I figured out my next move. More family members kept calling, including some cousins I hadn't talked to in years who suddenly needed to share their opinions about my choices. One uncle left a voicemail saying I was going to hell for choosing that woman over family, while an aunt texted that she always knew I'd disappoint everyone eventually. I turned my phone off and just sat in that crappy motel room thinking about how I'd gotten here, how many chances I'd had to tell the truth. Every family dinner where I'd played along with their racism, every time I'd laughed at their jokes to keep the peace, it all felt like betrayal now. The worst part was knowing Amara had been right there the whole time, dealing with the fact that the man who said he loved her wouldn't even claim her in front of his family. 3 days after that awful motel night, I got a text from Mom saying they needed to talk and I should come by the house. I drove over not knowing what to expect, but hoping maybe they'd had time to cool down and think things through. The front door was already open when I got there, and I could see them all gathered in the living room like some kind of intervention. Mom sat on the couch with tissues in her hand, while Dad stood by the fireplace with his arms crossed, and that look on his face that meant business. Aunt Linda was there too, perched on the arm of the chair like she was ready to pounce, and I noticed Conrad and Eleanor Langley sitting at the dining room table with folders spread out in front of them. My stomach churned as I stepped inside and everyone turned to stare at me. Mom started crying harder when she saw me and Dad's jaw tightened even more if that was possible. I stood there in the doorway not sure if I should come all the way in or just turn around and leave. That's when Aunt Linda jumped up and moved to block the doorway behind me, her face red and angry. "If you walk out that door with her, you're done. No family events, no holidays, nothing." The words hit me like a slap, but I looked her straight in the eye. "Then I guess this is goodbye." I stepped around her and headed for the door, but Dad's voice boomed behind me. "I'll call every connection I have. You'll never work in this city again." I stopped and turned back one last time to face him. "Then I'll work somewhere else. Somewhere that judges me on my merit, not who I love." His face went purple, but I didn't wait for his response. I walked out and kept walking even as Mom screamed my name from the porch. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely get my car keys out of my pocket. The whole drive to Amara's place, my chest felt tight, and I had to pull over twice because I couldn't see through the tears. When I finally got to her apartment building, I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes trying to pull myself together. She must have been watching from her window because she came down and found me there. She opened my car door and just looked at me for a long moment before pulling me into a hug. We made it to her car because mine was shaking too much to drive, and that's when I completely broke down. The weight of what just happened, what I just lost, hit me all at once. My whole body shook as 8 months of lies and stress and family pressure came pouring out. She held me while I sobbed like a kid, getting snot and tears all over her shirt. When I finally stopped shaking enough to breathe normally, she pulled back and looked at me. Her own eyes were full of tears, but there was something else there too. Something that made my stomach drop. She didn't start the car immediately, even though we were just sitting in the parking lot. Instead, she turned to me with tears streaming down her face. 8 months, Preston. 8 months of you being too ashamed to claim me." The words cut deeper than anything my family had said. "I wasn't ashamed of you. I was trying to protect you from them." She shook her head hard, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "No, you were protecting yourself from having to choose, and you made me your secret in the process." I wanted to argue, but I knew she was right. Every lie I told, every excuse I made, it was all about avoiding this exact moment. She started the car, and we drove to her apartment in silence. Both of us were processing what just happened, and I could feel the distance between us even though we were sitting inches apart. I knew she was right, and that made it worse. The radio played some old song about love, and I wanted to turn it off, but I didn't dare touch anything. We pulled into her apartment complex, and I saw another car I recognized in the visitor spot. Sure enough, when we got upstairs, Savannah McGrath was waiting outside Amara's door with a bottle of wine and a box of tissues. She was clearly prepared for either celebration or disaster, and she took one look at us and knew which one it is. Her face went from hopeful to worried in about half a second. She wrapped Amara in a hug while shooting me a look that could have melted steel. We all went inside, and Savannah poured wine while Amara told her everything that had happened at my parents' house. I sat there on the couch feeling like the worst person in the world while they talked about me like I wasn't even there. Savannah kept shaking her head and making angry noises every time Amara mentioned another thing my family had said or done. When Amara got to the part about the private investigator, Savannah actually stood up and paced around the living room. She was a lawyer and started talking about harassment charges and restraining orders, but Amara just looked tired. I tried to help by getting ice from the freezer, but even that felt wrong, like I didn't belong in her space anymore. The apartment that had felt like home for months suddenly felt foreign and cold. Savannah stayed for another hour, mostly just being there for Amara, while I sat uselessly on the edge of everything. After another 20 minutes, Savannah finally looked straight at me and said they had a private investigator following us for months. The words hung in the air while I processed what that actually meant. All those times we thought we were alone, all those private moments that weren't private at all. Savannah's whole face changed when she heard about the stalking, and she started pacing around talking about harassment laws and restraining orders. She pulled out her phone and started typing notes about legal options, while Amara just sat there looking exhausted from everything. I asked if I could get them anything from the kitchen, but they both just shook their heads, so I went to the bathroom instead just to give them space. When I came back out, they were talking quietly, and I could tell from their body language that I needed to give them more room. Amara looked at me and said she needed time to process everything that happened tonight and asked if I could sleep on the couch. I grabbed the spare blanket from her closet and made myself a bed on her small couch while they went into her bedroom still talking. The couch was too short for me and my feet hung off the end, but I didn't care because my mind was racing through everything. I kept thinking about how I'd lied for 8 months instead of just standing up to my parents from the start. Every fake story about Audrey, every time I let them say racist things without pushing back, all of it led to tonight's disaster. The apartment was quiet except for occasional muffled voices from the bedroom, and I just lay there staring at the ceiling. Around 3 in the morning, I heard Savannah leave and Amara's bedroom door close again. I couldn't sleep at all, just kept replaying the look on my mom's face when she saw Amara at the door. When morning light started coming through the windows, I checked my phone and almost dropped it. There were 73 missed calls and over 150 texts from various family members. Most of the texts were from cousins and aunts asking what happened because they were getting different stories from everyone. Some messages were angry, some confused, and a few were actually supportive, which surprised me. My cousin texted that my parents were telling everyone I had some kind of breakdown and brought a random woman to dinner. Another message said Dad was at the country club at 6 in the morning doing damage control with his golf buddies. I scrolled through more texts and saw one from my therapist, Galen, asking if I was okay because my mom had called his office. I immediately called Galen's emergency line, and he picked up on the second ring, sounding concerned. He said he could fit me in that afternoon and that we needed to talk about what happened with my family. I made coffee in Amara's kitchen, trying to be quiet, but she came out anyway looking tired and sad. We didn't really talk, just kind of moved around each other getting ready for the day ahead. She had to go to work and I needed to go home to get clothes before my therapy appointment. The drive to my apartment felt strange because everything looked the same, but my whole world had changed overnight. At Galen's office that afternoon, I sat on his couch and told him everything that happened at my parents' house. He listened without interrupting while I explained about the private investigator and my mom's breakdown and Dad's threats. When I finished, he leaned forward and told me that choosing my values over my family's racism took incredible courage, even if the path was messy. He helped me see that while I'd made mistakes with the lying, standing up to them finally was the right thing. We talked about how to handle the aftermath, and he suggested bringing Amara to a session if she was willing. On the drive home from therapy, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad that just had photo attachments. I pulled over to look and saw pictures of legal documents with my name being crossed out and removed. The family trust papers, his will, everything that tied me to their money was being systematically erased. It hurt more than I expected, even though I knew it was coming after last night's confrontation. 20 minutes later, Mom sent a long, rambling email about how I destroyed her entire social standing in the community. She wrote about how the country club wives were already gossiping, and she couldn't show her face at her regular lunch spot. She went on about the deposits they'd lost on wedding venues they'd secretly booked for me and Audrey. The email got more unhinged as it went on, talking about how our family name was ruined forever now. I sat in my car for 10 minutes trying to decide how to respond to her email. Finally, I typed out a simple reply that her social standing was built on racism, and it deserved to be destroyed. After I hit send, I turned off my phone because I couldn't handle any more family drama today. I drove to Amara's apartment and waited outside until she got home from work that evening. When she pulled up, she looked surprised to see me, but not angry, which felt like progress. I told her about the therapy session and asked if she'd consider coming to one with me later in the week. She said she'd think about it, but that we had a lot to work through after everything that happened. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize, and when I opened it, I saw it was from Alessandro Wilcox, one of Dad's biggest clients at the firm. He wrote that he'd heard what happened at my parents' house and wanted me to know he thought I did the right thing standing by my girlfriend, even if it cost me my family. I stared at that message for a long time because Alessandro had always seemed just like Dad with his country club membership and his perfect white family and all the company photos. His message made me realize that not everyone in Dad's circle shared his views about race. They just stayed quiet about it to keep the peace and their business relationships intact. I was still thinking about Alessandro's text when my phone rang with a call from Fatima Cash, the estate attorney who handled all of Grandma's legal stuff. She told me in a very professional voice that she was calling to inform me that my grandmother had officially removed me from her will, and the paperwork had been filed that morning with the probate court. I asked if Grandma had said anything about why, and Fatima just cleared her throat and said the documents spoke for themselves before hanging up quickly. That afternoon, I started looking online for a new apartment because my current place was in a building Dad owned through one of his companies, and he'd already sent an email giving me 30 days to get out. The eviction notice was taped to my door when I got home, and the building manager avoided eye contact when I passed him in the lobby, like he was embarrassed about the whole thing. Amara came over that evening to help me search for apartments on her laptop while I packed my stuff into boxes I'd gotten from the liquor store down the street. We sat on my couch scrolling through listings, but there was still this tension between us that made everything feel careful and fragile, like we were both afraid of saying the wrong thing. She'd point out places that looked nice, and I'd add them to a list, but we weren't really talking about what happened or how my lying for 8 months had hurt her trust in me. We spent the next 3 days looking at apartments all over the city, and each place felt like a test of whether we could move forward together or if the damage was too deep. The first place was a dump with roaches in the kitchen, and the second was way too expensive, but the third one in a neighborhood about 20 minutes from my family's area seemed perfect. It was small but clean with big windows and a landlord who didn't care about my last name or who my father was in the business community. We signed the lease that afternoon, and I felt relief at having a place that was completely separate from my family's influence and control. 2 days after I moved into the new apartment, Amara's mom, Kira, called and invited me to dinner at their house that weekend. Her voice on the phone was polite but firm, and I knew this wasn't really an invitation so much as a summons to explain myself to the woman whose daughter I'd been hiding. I showed up at their house on Saturday with flowers and a nervous stomach that wouldn't stop churning no matter how many deep breaths I took. Kira opened the door and looked at me for a long moment before stepping aside to let me in without saying anything welcoming or warm. The dinner table was set for 3 with Amara already sitting there looking uncomfortable while her mom brought out plates of food that smelled amazing, but that I could barely taste through my anxiety. Kira sat down across from me and started asking questions about my family and whether I was really ready to stand up to them long term or if this was just a temporary rebellion. I answered as honestly as I could, admitting that I'd been a coward for lying and that I understood why she didn't trust me after everything that had happened. She listened without interrupting much, but I could see in her eyes that she wasn't convinced I wouldn't fold under pressure again if things got hard. After about an hour of questions, she finally said she was willing to give me a chance for Amara's sake, but that I had one shot to prove I could be the partner her daughter deserved. The next morning, Neil Carney called me, and I almost didn't answer because Neil was one of Dad's golf buddies who'd helped look for the fake Audrey in Connecticut. He said he was calling to warn me that Dad was telling everyone at the country club that I'd had some kind of mental breakdown, and that's why I'd brought a random woman to dinner. According to Neil, Dad was spinning the whole thing as me having a crisis that needed medical attention rather than admitting the truth about their racism and his investigation. I thanked Neil for the heads up, even though I knew he was probably just fishing for gossip to share with the other club members over drinks. That afternoon, I sat at my laptop in my new apartment and started typing out a Facebook post telling my side of what really happened with my family. I wrote about the 8 months of lies, the private investigator, the racist comments, and how they'd removed me from everything rather than accept who I loved. My finger hovered over the post button for a long time before I finally clicked it and watched as the story went live to everyone in my network. Within an hour, the post had 50 shares and hundreds of comments from people in our community who couldn't believe what they were reading about my family. Dad's carefully built story about my mental breakdown fell apart as screenshot after screenshot spread through the country club's social media groups and local community pages. My phone started buzzing with messages from cousins and second cousins I hadn't heard from in years. Most of them said the same thing in different ways, that they understood why I chose Amara, but couldn't say it publicly because they didn't want to deal with the family drama. My cousin Eric texted that he'd always thought the family's attitude was wrong, but he had his own kids to think about and couldn't risk his inheritance by speaking up. Another cousin, Sarah, called late at night whispering that she was proud of me for standing up to them, but begged me not to tell anyone she'd reached out. It was weird getting all this secret support from people who wouldn't defend me in public, but at least I knew I wasn't completely alone in thinking my parents were wrong. 3 days later, I heard a knock at my new apartment door, and found Aunt Linda standing there holding a big cardboard box. She looked older than I remembered and wouldn't make eye contact as she pushed the box into my hands and said, Mom couldn't stand having my childhood stuff in the house anymore, but also couldn't bring herself to throw it away. I opened the box right there in the doorway and saw my old baseball trophies, photo albums from family vacations, and the watch Grandpa gave me before he died. Aunt Linda shifted her weight and mumbled something about how this didn't mean she agreed with my choices, but family was family, and Mom was suffering enough already. She left before I could say anything, and I stood there holding 20 years of memories that my parents couldn't keep, but couldn't destroy either. 3 months after everything blew up, Amara and I sat in a therapist's office on uncomfortable chairs, trying to work through all the damage my lies had caused. The therapist was this older woman who didn't let either of us get away with easy answers, and kept pushing us to really examine why I'd hidden Amara for so long, and why she'd stayed with someone who was ashamed of her. We went every week and slowly started rebuilding trust by setting clear boundaries about what we both needed from each other. Amara needed me to never hide her again, and to stand up for us publicly without hesitation. I needed her to understand that losing my family was hard, even though they were racist, and that grief was complicated. The sessions were tough, and sometimes we'd leave feeling worse than when we arrived. But we kept going back because we both wanted this to work. Around that same time, I started looking for a new job since Dad had made sure everyone in his business network knew I was persona non grata. I sent out dozens of applications to companies that had no connection to my father's world, and finally got an interview at a startup downtown that didn't care about my last name. The pay was 30% less than what I'd been making, but the hiring manager judged me on my actual skills instead of who my father was. I took the job immediately and felt relief at being able to build my career on my own merit for the first time. 2 weeks into the new job, Fatima Cash called saying Dad wanted to meet about a final offer. I told her I'd only communicate through my own lawyer now, a woman named Gabrielle Branson who specialized in family estrangement cases. Gabrielle met with Fatima and came back with the message that Dad would restore my inheritance, trust fund access, and family position if I ended things with Amara and came back to the family business. The offer included a written apology I'd have to sign admitting I'd been going through a rebellious phase and that I understood the importance of maintaining family standards. Gabrielle watched my face as she read the terms, and when I told her to decline everything, she smiled and said she'd handle it professionally, but firmly. 6 months after that terrible Sunday dinner, Amara and I had worked through most of our issues and built something stronger than what we'd had before. We'd learned to communicate honestly, even when it was uncomfortable, and set boundaries that protected both of us. She'd forgiven me for the lying, but made it clear that trust was earned daily through actions, not words. We moved in together officially, combining our stuff in the apartment and making it truly ours with photos on the walls and her plants taking over the windowsills. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real and honest in a way it never could have been while I was hiding her. During the holidays that year, instead of the formal family gatherings I'd grown up with, we celebrated with Amara's family and the friends who'd supported us through everything. Her mom, Kira, cooked enough food for 20 people, and the house was loud with laughter and music and kids running around. Nobody asked about bloodlines or trust funds or country club memberships. They just welcomed me as the person who loved Amara and treated me like I belonged there. It was different from what I'd known, but it was warm and genuine and full of the kind of love that didn't come with conditions. Looking back now, I spent so many years letting fear control my choices, afraid of disappointing my parents, afraid of losing my inheritance, afraid of being cut off from the only world I'd known. But losing my racist family ended up being the price of gaining an authentic life with someone who loved me for who I really was, not who my parents wanted me to be. Thanks for exploring all these questions with me today. It's been a pretty curious little journey to share together. Until next time, take care. Subscribe for more content like this.